Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
The opulent living room of the Quartermaine mansion, a space usually reserved for orchestrated displays of wealth and familial power, had become a crucible of raw, unvarnished human emotion. The very air felt thick and heavy, saturated with the ghosts of past betrayals and the sharp, metallic taste of present reckoning. It was a stage set for a confrontation years in the making, a moment where the carefully constructed walls of lies were finally crumbling to dust. Jason Morgan stood near the grand fireplace, his posture the same unyielding line it always was, but the energy radiating from him was different. It wasn't the controlled, focused calm of the enforcer, the man who dealt in cold, hard facts and necessary violence. This was a deeper, more primal stillness, the quiet of a gathering storm. His blue eyes, usually so devoid of readable emotion, were fixed on the man in the center of the room with an intensity that could have cut diamond. He was the judge, the jury, and, if necessary, the executioner, and his verdict had already been reached. Beside him, Tracy Quartermaine, a woman whose sharp tongue and shrewd mind had navigated the shark-infested waters of her family for decades, was uncharacteristically silent. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, not in a gesture of defiance, but as if to hold herself together. The usual mocking glint in her eyes was gone, replaced by a profound, weary hurt. She watched the scene unfold, her gaze a mixture of disgust and a painful, reluctant pity. She had been manipulated, used as a pawn in a game she hadn't even known she was playing, and the humiliation of that was a fresh wound on top of the old scars. And in the center of it all, under the unforgiving glare of the crystal chandelier, was Ronnie. Once a man who carried himself with a slimy, unearned confidence, he was now a shell of that former self. His clothes were disheveled, his face pale and slick with a panicked sweat. His eyes darted between Jason and Tracy, a trapped animal searching for an escape route that had long since been sealed off. The evidence was irrefutable. The digital trail, the witness accounts coerced into the light by Jason's particular brand of persuasion, the financial records, it was all laid bare. He had been caught in a web of his own spinning, and the spiders he had tried to ensnare were now closing in. You understand, Jason's voice was low, devoid of inflection, yet it carried through the room with the force of a physical blow, that there are no more lies left to tell. No more excuses. We have it all. The fake invoices, the offshore accounts you used to siphon from the ELQ accounts Tracy managed. The staged security breaches you used to cover your tracks. And we know about the deal you made with Cyrus Renault. At the mention of Cyrus's name, a fresh wave of terror washed over Ronnie. That was the one part of his scheme he had been certain was buried too deep for anyone to find. Cyrus Renault was not a man whose name one invoked lightly. His involvement elevated Ronnie's crimes from simple embezzlement to a capital offense in the underworld's ledger. Jason, please, Ronnie stammered, his voice cracking. You have to understand. I was in a corner. I had debts you don't walk away from. Cyrus, he offered me a way out. All I had to do was destabilize a few of Tracy's holdings, create a little chaos. I never meant for it to go this far. Tracy found her voice then, a sharp, brittle sound. You never meant for it to go this far, she repeated, her tone dripping with acidic scorn. You systematically looted funds I was entrusted with, you compromised the security of this family's legacy, and you handed leverage to a man who would see this entire city burn to the ground for a percentage point of profit. What, precisely, was your endgame, Ronnie? A tropical retirement before Cyrus decided you were a loose end and had you fitted for a concrete overcoat? Ronnie flinched, her words hitting too close to the fear that had been gnawing at him for months. He had been living on borrowed time, and he knew it. But facing Cyrus's wrath seemed a distant threat compared to the immediate, tangible danger standing a few feet away in the form of Jason Morgan. I was a fool, Tracy. A desperate, greedy fool, he cried out, his hands trembling as he held them out in a placating gesture. I see that now. I do. I'll give it all back. Every last cent. I'll wire it all back today, right now. Jason took a single step forward. It wasn't a large movement, but it was enough to make Ronnie stumble back a step, his heel catching on the ornate edge of the Persian rug. The money is already gone, Jason stated flatly. We recovered it 48 hours ago. You were just the last one to know. The revelation stole the last vestiges of color from Ronnie's face. His financial escape hatch was gone. He was utterly, completely bankrupt in every sense of the word. Then what do you want from me? He whispered, his voice ragged with despair. What we want, Tracy said, stepping forward to stand beside Jason, a united front, is something you've never been particularly good at, Ronnie. Accountability. You didn't just steal from a company. You betrayed a trust. You looked me in the eye, sat at my table, and you lied. You made me look like a fool in front of my own family, in front of the entire Port Charles business community. You used my name, my reputation, as a shield for your filth. The weight of her words, the sheer, focused contempt in them, seemed to physically press down on Ronnie. He saw in that moment that this wasn't just about the crime. It was about the personal, intimate nature of the betrayal. He had not just broken rules, he had broken a human connection, however transactional it may have been. Jason's gaze was unwavering. You're going to confess. Everything. To the PCPD. You're going to sign a full, detailed statement implicating yourself and outlining every instruction you received from Cyrus's organization. You will become the state's key witness. No! The word was a strangled gasp. You can't ask me to do that. You know what Cyrus will do to me. A prison cell won't protect me. Nothing will protect me. He'll have me killed before I even finish my mugshot. That's the choice, Jason said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. You face the legal system or you face me. Right here. Right now. The implicit threat in those words hung in the air, more terrifying than any shouted ultimatum. Ronnie knew Jason's reputation. He knew that facing him was not a metaphor. It was a promise of a final, brutal, and utterly efficient conclusion. The PCPD, even Cyrus's long reach, offered a sliver of a chance, a few more desperate breaths. Jason offered only an end. It was in that moment, standing on the precipice of his own annihilation, that something in Ronnie broke. The last shreds of his pride, his dignity, his sense of self-preservation, all shattered under the immense, crushing pressure. His knees, which had been trembling violently, gave way. He didn't simply slump to the floor, it was a deliberate, desperate collapse. The sound of his knees hitting the polished hardwood floor was a dull, final thud that echoed in the silent room. Tracy's breath caught in her throat. She had expected begging, pleading, tears perhaps. But this was an act of utter submission. It was medieval. It was grotesque. And it was profoundly effective. Please, Ronnie choked out, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. He was no longer looking at Jason, his pleading, desperate eyes were fixed on Tracy. He had correctly identified Jason as an immovable force, a cliff face against which his pleas would simply shatter. But Tracy was human. She was motivated by anger, by hurt, by a sense of justice, but she was not a killer. She was his only hope. Tracy, please, he wept, his voice thick with tears and snot. I am so sorry. You have to believe me. I am so sorry. I was wrong. I was a weak, pathetic, horrible man. I betrayed you. I disrespected you. I see the magnitude of what I've done now. I see the hurt in your eyes, and I know I put it there. Please, I am begging you. Forgive me. Please, forgive me. The words poured out of him in a torrent of self-flagellation. He wasn't just asking for his life, he was asking for absolution. He was confessing his sins not to a priest, but to the woman he had wronged, hoping against hope that her mercy could somehow stay the hand of the angel of death standing behind her. Tracy stared down at him, a maelstrom of emotions warring within her. There was a part of her, a large part, that felt a savage sense of satisfaction. Seeing this man who had arrogantly believed he could outsmart her brought so low, reduced to a weeping puddle on her floor, was a potent form of vengeance. Yet, another part of her, the part that had been raised with a certain code of conduct, no matter how frayed, was deeply uncomfortable. This was too raw, too real. It was a spectacle of degradation that left a bitter taste in her mouth. Ronnie, seeing her hesitation, pressed his advantage, if it could be called that. He reached out a trembling hand, not to touch her, but in a gesture of supplication. "I'm nothing," he sobbed. "I'm less than nothing. I know that. You are 10 times the person I could ever hope to be. You are strong and smart, and I was a fool to ever think I could get one over on you. Please, Tracy. Have mercy. Don't let him, please, don't let him end me. I'll do anything. I'll confess. I'll go to the police. I'll wear a wire. Anything you want. Just, please. Forgive me. Give me a chance to make this right." The word forgiveness hung in the air. It was a word that had little currency in the world Jason and Tracy often inhabited. Forgiveness was a luxury, a vulnerability. Yet, here it was, being begged for with a life as the stake. Jason watched the scene, his expression unchanging. He had given the ultimatum. The choice of how this proceeded now rested, unexpectedly, with Tracy. He would follow her lead. This was, in many ways, her justice to dispense. Tracy took a deep, shaky breath. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her gut. The betrayal would leave a permanent scar. But as she looked at the broken man groveling at her feet, she realized that killing him or handing him over to be killed wouldn't erase the hurt. It might even compound it, turning her into something she didn't want to be. There was, she understood, a power far greater than vengeance. It was the power to grant a stay of execution. It was the power to be the one who decided whether a person lived or died, not out of rage, but out of a calculated, almost regal, form of mercy. She slowly uncrossed her arms, her posture straightening, regaining its courtemane authority. She looked down at Ronnie, her gaze no longer one of a wounded victim, but of a sovereign pronouncing a decree. "Get up," she said, her voice cold and clear, cutting through his sobs. Ronnie flinched, looking up at her with red-rimmed, terrified eyes. He didn't move, frozen in his posture of supplication. "I said, get up," Tracy repeated, her tone leaving no room for disobedience. "I will not have you staining my rug with your tears." Slowly, unsteadily, Ronnie pushed himself to his feet. He stood before her, swaying slightly, unable to meet her gaze for more than a second before his eyes dropped back to the floor in shame. The contrast was stark, Tracy, composed and formidable, and Ronnie, a shattered, pathetic figure. "Your begging is pathetic," she stated, not with cruelty, but with a simple, devastating truth. "It doesn't move me. Your tears are for yourself, not for the damage you've caused. I see that. Do not for one second believe I am fooled by this performance." Ronnie opened his mouth to protest, to insist on his sincerity, but a slight shift in Jason's stance behind Tracy made him snap it shut again. However, Tracy continued, her eyes narrowing, "Your life is not worth the burden it would place on my conscience. Or on Jason's. You are not worth that. You are a gnat. An annoyance. And your punishment will not be a quick, quiet death that ends your problems. Your punishment will be living with the consequences of your actions." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You will do exactly as Jason said. You will go to the PCPD. You will confess to everything. You will provide them with every detail of your dealings with Cyrus Renault. You will become their star witness, and you will live the rest of your life, however short that may be, looking over your shoulder, waiting for the knife in the dark or the bullet from the shadows. You will know true fear, Ronnie. You will live in a cage, both literal and figurative, and every single day, you will remember that the only reason you are still breathing this air is because I, Tracy Quartermaine, decided to allow it." She paused, letting the full weight of her sentence sink in. It was a fate, in many ways, worse than death. It was a life sentence of paranoia and dread. "Do you understand the mercy I am showing you?" she asked, her head tilted. Ronnie could only nod, a jerky, broken movement. Yes, he whispered. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. Don't thank me, she snapped. Your gratitude is as worthless as your word. Your life from this moment forward belongs to the justice system. You will do exactly as you are told. If you deviate from this plan by so much as a single syllable, if you try to run, if you even think about double-crossing us, the deal is off. And you will answer to Jason. Is that perfectly clear? Ronnie's eyes flickered toward Jason, who gave a single, slow nod. It was all the confirmation he needed. Crystal, Ronnie breathed, his body slumping in defeat. The fight was gone. The desperation had been replaced by a numb, terrified acceptance. He had traded a quick death for a slow, terrifying one, and he was grateful for the trade. Tracy turned her back on him, a final, dismissive gesture. She walked toward the window, looking out at the manicured gardens of the Quartermain estate, a world of order and legacy that Ronnie had tried to violate. The audience was over. Jason moved then, not toward Ronnie, but to the door. He opened it, revealing two of his most trusted men standing in the hall. They were silent, imposing figures. Take him to the PCPD, Jason instructed, his voice back to its usual businesslike calm. Wait with him until he gives his full confession to Detective Chase. Make sure he doesn't get lost on the way. The men nodded, stepping into the room. They didn't grab Ronnie roughly, but their presence was a physical reminder of his new reality. He was no longer a free man making choices. He was a package to be delivered. As the men escorted him from the room, Ronnie cast one last, fleeting glance at Tracy's back. There was no forgiveness in her posture, no absolution. There was only a cold, unyielding justice. He had begged for his life, and he had been granted it, but at a cost he was only beginning to comprehend. He had been forced to his knees, and in doing so, he had lost everything he ever was, everything he could ever be. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Jason and Tracy alone in the vast, silent room. The tension slowly seeped out of the air, replaced by a weary emptiness. The confrontation was over, the score settled, yet there was no sense of victory, only closure. Jason walked over to stand beside Tracy at the window. They watched in silence as Ronnie was put into a car, his head bowed, a man marching to his own personal hell. He'll be dead within a year, Jason stated, a simple fact. Cyrus's people will get to him in protective custody. It's only a matter of time. Tracy didn't look at him, her gaze still fixed on the distant point where the car had disappeared. I know, she said quietly. But it won't be by my hand. Or yours. His fate is his own making now. We've just redirected the stream. She finally turned to face Jason, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Thank you, Jason. For handling it. For backing my play. Jason gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. You didn't have to show him that mercy. It was the harder choice. Was it mercy? Tracy asked, a cynical smile touching her lips. Or was it just a more refined form of punishment? Letting him live in fear, knowing his end is coming but not knowing when, is that really kindness? It's justice, Jason replied. Your kind of justice. That's what matters. He was right. In the brutal economy of Port Charles, where lives were often settled like outstanding debts, what had transpired in the Quartermain mansion was a rare and nuanced thing. It wasn't a simple act of violence or a straightforward legal solution. It was a personal reckoning, a forced humiliation that served as both punishment and a twisted form of grace. Ronnie had been brought to his knees, not just physically, but spiritually. He had been broken open and laid bare, and in that state of utter vulnerability, he had been granted a future, however bleak and terrifying. Tracy took a deep, steadying breath, squaring her shoulders. The moment of vulnerability was over. The indomitable Tracy Quartermain was reasserting herself. Well, she said, her voice regaining its familiar sharp edge, I believe I need a very large drink. And then, we have a pharmaceutical company to unfreeze from the assets Ronnie tied up. The work, as they say, is never done. She walked away from the window, back toward the center of the room, back to the world of business and power and the endless game. But the image of Ronnie on his knees, begging for a forgiveness he would never truly receive, would be seared into her memory. It was a reminder of the cost of betrayal, the price of weakness, and the immense, terrifying power that came with the ability to grant a second chance to a man who absolutely did not deserve one. The spoils of this war were not money or power, but a grim, hard-won peace, purchased with the currency of a man's shattered pride and the chilling echo of his desperate, unanswered pleas. Ronnie never thought he'd see the day when his arrogance would come crashing down around him, but life in Port Charles had a cruel way of teaching humility. The tension in the Quartermaine mansion was unbearable, the air was thick with unspoken rage and disappointment. Tracy Quartermaine stood tall, arms crossed, her eyes blazing with fury. Jason Morgan, silent but visibly simmering, loomed just behind her, his expression unreadable but dangerous. Ronnie's heart pounded as he realized there was no escaping this confrontation. "You lied," Tracy spat out, her voice slicing through the silence like a blade. "You lied to me, to this family, and you dragged Jason into your mess. You thought you could play games with Quartermaines? Think again." Ronnie tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his confidence evaporating. Jason's stare was unflinching, cold as ice, and Ronnie knew one wrong word could seal his fate. "I didn't mean for things to get this far," Ronnie stammered, his voice shaking. "I was trying to protect everyone, I swear," Jason cut him off sharply. "Protect?" he repeated, taking a step forward, his tone low but deadly. "You call stealing from ELQ and lying to Tracy protection? You're lucky you're still standing, Ronnie. If this were my world, you'd already be done." Tracy lifted her chin, glaring at Ronnie with disgust. "You thought you could manipulate me? I've dealt with far worse men than you. You underestimated me, and that was your first mistake." Ronnie could feel the heat of humiliation burning in his chest. Every ounce of bravado he once carried had vanished, replaced with regret and fear. Jason's presence was enough to make anyone second-guess their life choices, and Ronnie was no exception. He took a shaky step backward, his voice cracking as he said, "Jason, please. I didn't steal the money for myself. I was blackmailed. I didn't have a choice." Tracy's eyes narrowed. "Oh, the famous 'I was blackmailed' excuse. How original." Jason crossed his arms, silent for a moment before saying, "Who?" Ronnie hesitated, looking from Jason to Tracy, then back again. "You don't understand," he muttered. "If I say the name, I'm dead." Jason's voice dropped even lower. "You'll be dead if you don't," he warned. Ronnie swallowed hard, his hands trembling. He'd heard stories about Jason's calm demeanor hiding a lethal edge, and right now, that calm was more terrifying than any outburst. The room felt smaller by the second. Tracy took a deep breath, her anger now tempered by cold precision. "You will tell us everything," she said firmly. "Because you don't get to betray this family and walk away. You will own up to every lie, every scheme, every dirty trick you pulled." Ronnie's knees felt weak, and for a fleeting moment, he thought about running. But Jason's steely gaze pinned him in place. "Don't even think about it," Jason murmured, reading his mind. Ronnie's breath came out unevenly as the reality of the situation sank in. He was cornered, exposed, and powerless. Tracy turned away for a moment, pacing the floor, her heels clicking against the marble like a metronome of fury. "I brought you into this family's business because I believed in you," she said, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. "I defended you when others said you couldn't be trusted. And this is how you repay me? You think you can destroy what Edward built? Not on my watch." Jason's jaw tightened, his blue eyes flickering with anger. "Tracy, let me handle this," he said quietly. But Tracy shook her head. "No, Jason. He needs to understand what he's done to this family. He needs to see the damage." Ronnie finally broke, dropping to his knees in front of them both. The sound of it echoed through the room, and Tracy froze mid-step. "Please," he choked out. "I'm sorry, Tracy. I'm sorry, Jason. I was wrong. I messed up. I didn't mean for it to go this far. his voice cracked with desperation, tears forming in his eyes. Jason's expression didn't soften, but he looked down at Ronnie with a mix of anger and disbelief. "You think sorry fixes this?" he asked, his tone harsh but steady. "You've put people in danger, Ronnie. You nearly got someone killed." Tracy's fury began to tremble into something darker, disappointment. She looked at Ronnie kneeling there, and for the first time, she saw a man stripped of pride, completely undone. "You wanted to play with power, Ronnie," she said bitterly. "Now you're learning the price." Ronnie lifted his head, tears streaking down his face. "I'll make it right. I'll tell you everything. Just don't ruin me, Tracy. Don't let Jason hand me over to the cops." Jason glanced at Tracy, his voice flat. "He's lucky I don't drag him to Sunny myself." Tracy gave a sharp look that silenced him for a moment. "Not yet," she said. "Let's hear what he has to say." Ronnie nodded quickly, desperate to grasp at the tiny thread of mercy she offered. "It was Mason," he said finally, his words shaking. "He came to me months ago. Said if I didn't move money out of ELQ accounts for him, he'd expose me for things I did years ago. I didn't think he'd actually go this far. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out." Jason clenched his fists. "Mason Gatlin," he repeated, his tone deadly calm. "You let Mason blackmail you and drag the Quartermaines into it?" Ronnie nodded miserably. "I didn't have a choice." Tracy shook her head, her voice cutting through the air like ice. "You always have a choice, Ronnie. You chose wrong." Jason stepped forward, towering over Ronnie. "You're going to take me to him," he said in a low, commanding tone. Ronnie's eyes widened. "Jason, please, he's dangerous." Jason's expression didn't change. "So am I." Tracy crossed her arms again, watching as Jason's control reasserted itself. "You're going to help clean up this mess, Ronnie," she said. "And when you're done, you're going to disappear from Port Charles. Because if I ever see you near this family again, you won't get another chance to beg." Ronnie nodded frantically, his voice hoarse. "Yes, ma'am. I'll fix it. I'll make this right." Jason leaned closer, his voice a low growl. "You better. Because if you don't, I'll finish what Mason started." Ronnie swallowed hard, nodding again, knowing Jason wasn't bluffing. He could feel the weight of both their fury pressing down on him, and it was suffocating. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Tracy finally turned away, walking toward the window, her reflection hard and cold in the glass. "You disgust me," she said quietly. "You could have come to me. You could have told me what was happening. Instead, you lied. You stole. And now, you've made us targets." Ronnie's sobs filled the silence. "I thought I could handle it alone," he whispered. Jason shook his head slowly. "You never could," he said simply. Tracy turned back, her composure slowly returning as her anger settled into something more dangerous, resolve. "Jason," she said firmly. "Take him to the PCPD. Let him tell them what he told us. And then, make sure Mason knows that if he ever comes near ELQ again, he'll regret it." Jason nodded slightly. "I'll handle it." He looked down at Ronnie, who still knelt trembling on the floor. "Get up," he ordered. Ronnie hesitated, then pushed himself up, his legs weak and unsteady. Jason grabbed his arm roughly, forcing him to stand straight. "You're going to tell the truth this time," Jason warned. "All of it. If you lie again, I'll know." Tracy's gaze softened just a fraction as she looked at Ronnie one last time. "You brought this on yourself," she said. "I gave you a chance to prove yourself. You chose greed over loyalty. Don't expect any sympathy." Ronnie nodded miserably, unable to meet her eyes. "I understand," he whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Tracy didn't answer. She just turned away, her voice cold. You're already too late. As Jason pulled Ronnie toward the door, Ronnie looked back one last time. The image of Tracy, standing tall and unyielding in the glow of the chandelier, burned into his memory. For the first time, he realized the true cost of his betrayal. It wasn't just about the money or the lies, it was about breaking the trust of the only people who had ever given him a chance. Jason's grip tightened on his arm as they stepped out into the night, the heavy door closing behind them. Outside, the cold air hit Ronnie like a slap. He shivered, glancing sideways at Jason, who didn't speak a word. The silence was worse than yelling. Jason, Ronnie started, his voice shaking, I know you hate me, but please, tell Tracy I meant it when I said I'm sorry. Jason's jaw clenched. You tell her yourself, after you face what's coming. Ronnie nodded, defeated. They walked toward the car, the sound of gravel crunching under their feet. As Jason opened the car door, Ronnie stopped, his voice barely audible. Do you think she'll ever forgive me? Jason paused, then looked at him sharply. Tracy Quartermain doesn't forgive betrayal, he said flatly. You're lucky she didn't let me deal with you my way. Ronnie lowered his head, silent, knowing Jason was right. The car engine roared to life, the darkness of Port Charles swallowing them whole as they drove off toward the PCPD. Back inside the mansion, Tracy stood alone, staring at the family portrait on the wall. Her reflection in the glass looked older, colder, more tired than she wanted to admit. Father, she murmured softly, you always said never to trust anyone outside the family. I should have listened. Her voice trembled, but she steadied herself. The Quartermain name had been through worse, and it would survive this too. Still, the sting of betrayal lingered, deep and sharp. Hours later, Jason returned, his expression unreadable. He confessed, he said simply. Mason's next. Tracy nodded slowly, not surprised. Good. I want this over with. Jason studied her for a moment, then asked quietly, you okay? Tracy exhaled, her face hardening again. I will be, she said. As soon as this family is safe again. Jason nodded and turned to leave, but Tracy stopped him. Jason, she said softly, thank you. Jason gave a short nod. You don't have to thank me. I protect family. Always. As he left, Tracy sat down at her desk, exhaustion finally settling in. The house was silent again, but the echoes of Ronnie's pleading voice still haunted her. Somewhere deep down, she almost felt sorry for him, but she knew better than to let pity cloud her judgment. In Port Charles, weakness was a luxury no one could afford, especially when your last name was Quartermain. And as dawn crept over the horizon, Jason stood outside the PCPD, watching the light rise over the city he'd spent his life protecting. Ronnie's choices had set off a chain of events that would shake Port Charles to its core. But one thing was certain, no one betrayed Tracy Quartermain and got away with it. Not anymore.